Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing Native Son by Richard Wright. Well, you might have noticed that for once in my life I'm not screwing around in the cold open, or try not to screw around too much in this review here. The reason for that is that Native Son is a very serious book, and it's definitely the most serious book I've read so far on this list, maybe that I've read in my life. I want to address the fact up front that I'm always very uncomfortable talking about books that are about the black experience in America. For the simple reason that I could theoretically, maybe intellectually understand it, but emotionally and experientially, I have no understanding of what it's like to be black in America. I've led a very privileged life. I've never been very poor. I've never really wanted for things. I've never been really, discriminated against because of my gender or my race or my sexual orientation. But I recognize, as anyone with eyes and ears and a working mind does, that bigotry, is rampant in this country. And, less so now than in the 1940s. But that was a time when bigotry wasn't just rampant, but it was also accepted, and it was institutionalized, and it was more, I would say it was even more than institutionalized. I would say it was societal. It was society-wide. So, like I said up front, I'm uncomfortable talking about this topic, but I don't want to give it short shrift. I just want to tell you ahead of time that, if I sound like I'm talking out of my ass, it's, I am. I sort of am. I'm really commenting on a book that I have no place to comment on. But that being said, I'll do my best to address the issues that were raised in Native Son without hopefully making too much of a fool out of myself. First, I want to say that this book is a harrowing book. And the only thing I can compare it to is Invisible Man. And that's not even really a fair comparison. I thought that Invisible Man, up to this point, maybe was one of the most harrowing and disturbing books that I had read. But this book just put it in the dust. It was on a whole other plane. This is the story of a young black boy, I want to say he was 17, named Bigger Thomas. He lives in Chicago, and sometime around the 30s or 40s. Either they didn't state exactly when, or I just didn't catch it. That could entirely be my fault. And Bigger starts out the book as kind of a delinquent. But you don't feel that he's necessarily inherently a bad person. He kind of goes out and robs stores when he can, and he kind of gets into fights with his friends, and they masturbate in the movie theaters. He's just kind of a troubled youth, and he doesn't really want to work. It could be that he's lazy, or it could be that he just doesn't see a point in working. One of the things about this book is, the difference between this and Invisible Man, as I mentioned, is Invisible Man was written in the first person. And this was written in the third person, And it's a very distant third person because it's almost impossible half the time, even when Wright outright explicitly says the words that Bigger is thinking, it's really hard to get a beat on him emotionally. It's almost like, and I'll get into this in a minute, but I want to say that Bigger Thomas is a sociopath. I want to say that he's incapable of emotion. Anyway, and I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but I feel like that would be how we would look at him today. So what happens is that Bigger is hired by this white man, this important, very wealthy landowner. Not exactly a landowner. Like, he owns all the apartment buildings and stuff in Chicago. He's kind of like a slumlord, I guess we would say. But that's not how he carries himself. He carries himself with a lot of dignity and poise. And he thinks of himself as an angel to the black community. And, he donates all these millions of dollars, and he's donating ping pong tables and that sort of thing to the black community. And he hires Bigger specifically. He asked for a, down on his luck black kid who couldn't catch a break otherwise. So Mr. Dalton's the name, he hires Bigger as his chauffeur. And for Bigger, for you or for me, it seems like Bigger got a really good deal. He lived with his parents, well, his mother and his siblings up until then, in one room. So all 5 of them were in one room in kind of the slums that Mr. Dalton owned. When he comes to work for Dalton, he's given his own room, and he's given $25 a week, which, this is the 30s or the 40s. And he says, there's $20 you can give to your family, and the rent, I think is explicitly stated, is $8 a week. So the family would really be, obviously taken care of. And he said, and here's $5 for yourself. So it seems like it's a real sweet deal for Bigger. And at first he kind of jumps at the idea. But what happens is Dalton's daughter, Mary, who she kind of frolics around with the communist community in Chicago. And this was addressed in Invisible Man, too. Well, of course, that was in Harlem. But the communists are always trying to get a foot into the black community, with kind of the feeling that when we have the black community on our side, and we're natural allies, then we'll have the real power if we can get the black community on our side. So Mary and her boyfriend Jan take Bigger out on the town. She's supposed to be going to like a night class at the college. Instead, they go out on the town, and they're kind of trying to draw Bigger into the Communist Party, or at a minimum, maybe they're good-natured. It's never really explicitly stated. Maybe they're good-natured and they just want to, be nice to him and show him a good time. But he takes it as just a complete breach of trust, because he's not, at the time, he's not supposed to talk to white people. He's not supposed to touch white people. And Jan is trying to shake his hand, and they're trying to get him to talk and eat with him. And these are all these, social faux pas at the time. And what happens is Mary gets really drunk. He takes her home, and her mother, who's blind, walks in and finds her drunk, and Bigger's standing there. But the mother is blind. So he feels obliged, so that he won't be lynched, basically, to quiet Mary, and he ends up killing her. and there's kind of the hint that he was interested in raping her, but he never really goes through with it. So he kills her with a pillow, smothers her, and then stuffs her in a trunk and carries her down to the basement and burns her body. But he can't fit her body into the furnace, so he has to hack the head off with a hatchet. So to get away with this, he plans to set up Jan, who's her, communist boyfriend, and he sends a ransom note when people still think she's just missing, and he signs it red, and he signs it with a hammer and a sickle, and he's trying to set up Jan. But he's also thinking to himself, I can get money out of them, out of the Daltons. They're very wealthy. And what Bigger does is he goes to his actual girlfriend, Bessie, who, again, he seriously seems like a sociopath of some sort, because he's with Bessie, but he has no feelings for her. He just kind of uses her for sex when she's available. But he goes to Bessie, and again he tries to use her, and he says, I want you to deliver this, or rather, I'll deliver the note, I want you to pick up the ransom, we'll have the money, and before anybody knows what happens, we'll get out of Chicago, we'll get out of town. This book also kind of reminded me, it reminded me of two other books kind of jumped to mind, which was Crime and Punishment, although, of course, in that case, the Raskolnikov's guilt ate away at him. And The American Tragedy, which was a similar sort of a procedural of the crime and all its tiny little mistakes and how the criminal got captured and killed in its aftermath. Of course, An American Tragedy was about a white guy, and so racial politics didn't really come into it. And also, I think the character in American Tragedy is a lot more sympathetic. He's not a good person by any means, but certainly he had feelings and concerns and guilt and that sort of thing. What happens is that Bigger, all the little tiny mistakes that he made that started to add up, of course, people realize it's him, and he runs out, and he runs to Bessie, and Bessie is the only person that knows he murdered Mary Dalton, and he beats her to death with a brick. He actually doesn't beat her to death. He beats her until her brain is showing, and he thought she was dead, and then he dumped her down an air chute where she froze to death. Like I said, this is all just harrowing to have recounted. And reading it, even just the very kind of cold way I just described it now, has nothing on actually reading it, because you truly feel as you go along that everything Bigger does is just almost like robotic. Like he feels no more, beating Bessie's brains out than he does, buying a newspaper to read about himself. Like it's really very, very distressing and very disturbing to read about. And I understand why Wright wrote it the way that he did. Because the conclusion of the novel is the two varying viewpoints in court, as Bigger's defender and the public prosecutor, they each state their case. And neither of them, he pled guilty. He was obviously guilty and confessed, and the evidence was overwhelming. So it wasn't a jury trial. But his lawyer, Boris Max, who was a communist lawyer who was hired by the guy that he tried to set up, which in a way it almost makes you feel better about what kind of person Jan and Boris Max are, that they would forgive, Bigger and try to help him. So they present these two opposing arguments. And the prosecutor's argument, in a way, you feel is right. Because he says, look, this guy has committed a horrible murder. He needs to go to the chair. He's obviously a sociopath. I mean, he's not using these terms. These are my terms. He's obviously has no feelings. He obviously is a cancer on society. We can't let this go unpunished. But the thing about the prosecutor's argument is it's just couched in this ridiculous, horrible, racist overtones. He just keeps calling him an ape and a savage and a black ape. And it's, aside from the fact that you want to morally agree with him, you also understand that the reason why this is happening, the reason why he's pushing so hard for it, is that Bigger is black. And there's a mob outside, and the mob is pushing for the DA to execute Bigger. And you also understand that he's got kind of he's worried about his own future political career. So that was an interesting speech, because you feel like he has the moral right. He's in the right about the actual crime, but he's wrong about society, and he's wrong about why Bigger should be punished. And then you have Max's speech. And Max's speech is almost opposite and equal. And this is really I want to say it's almost like the heart of the novel. Like almost like you could read just Max's speech and get all of what Wright is trying to say. And what Max says is interesting because, we as law-abiding citizens, we want to see our murderers punished. But Max basically makes a speech that in a courtroom today would probably be thrown out as specious, but he made so many fascinating points. And he said, we've built up this society where this boy can't do anything, and he's not supposed to interact with white people. We've built the whole society around that basis, and then we act like we're surprised when he strikes back. And he sort of makes this argument that murdering him, the reason we're murdering him is because we as white people hate our own guilt in creating the society that created him, because we just want black people to stay in the South Side, in the black part of Chicago, and not make noise so we can just feel good about ourselves. And when he comes out and turns out to be a troubled youth and makes us challenge our own assumptions, we become murderous because we don't like the guilt. We become murderous and want to lynch him because we don't like the guilt that he inspires in us. And again, it's like the opposite of the prosecutor's speech. You feel that morally, from a law and order standpoint, he's wrong. And I mean, I'm personally against the death penalty, but I understand, why you might, in our society, that's an acceptable norm. So in this case, the law and order is against him, but the points he raises are so fascinating about what we've done to these people, how we've pushed them into a corner, and then we act like we're surprised when they strike back. And I really feel like the two closing speeches in court were kind of the crux of the matter. It was unflinching. I mean, Wright's portrayal is unflinching and brave, courageous, frankly. Because if I was a black author and I was writing about black injustice, I would make my main character sympathetic. I would make it so that I understood why he did what he did and act like he was backed into a corner. And Wright totally throws that out of the equation and says it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this is what society has done. And it's just such a bold choice. Just bold and harrowing. And like I said, I apologize. I know I've already spoken almost twice as long as I have about any other book. I just don't know that I can do it justice, and I don't want to make a fool of myself talking about it. So I apologize if I did. This is like a must-read. You must read it. You must get through it. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me. Anything you'd like to say? Leave it in the comments. Let me know what you think. Thanks.